I enlisted. 1959, I believe it was. Well, I was in school, graduated, worked for my father. I installed insulation in homes. I remember that they drummed into us about our sleep, about making our beds and making them properly, and then physical fitness. Well, I went all over. I was in Texas. That's where I started and went to school. I was an aircraft mechanic, so I went to Kansas, and to Nebraska. And, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska. I went overseas to Germany. I was there for 7 years. I went to Korea. I went to Philippine Islands. When I was in Germany, I visited Denmark and Switzerland and Sweden. Not too much, actually, because when we were dispersed to our first physical air base that we was going to be at for a while, nobody went to the same air base. Everybody split up and went all over the United States, so consequently, you lost contact with these people. When I first went in, busy. I mean, you got up and you had to make your bed, make it properly, and then you stood by it and they inspected you and they inspected your bed. You had to be dressed properly, had to have your shirt on, your pants on, your belts were right, your boots had to be shined. You had to have your hat in a certain position. Then when they got done with you on the inside, you went outside. And when you went outside, why, then you started your physical fitness. I loved it. I was in it for 20 years. Well, I would go into the city, wherever we were at, and visit the city, look at the stores, etc. Or I would study, especially if I was going to school to become my aircraft mechanic. I'd study the books about engines, rebuilding and putting them back together again, and taking parts of the aircraft off and putting them back on, inspecting where the fuel tanks had. Let me see, when I first went in, I went home on leave, I think after I went out, when I finished school and my training and got assigned to my first air base, which was in Kansas. I took a bus and went home and visited my family and stuff. And when I went back to Kansas and went to Topeka, Kansas, Forbes Air Force Base, and started to work. Well, it was about 1959. You take 20 years, 10 years to be, 69, 20 years to be 79. I went back to Monroe, Michigan in about 1979. Well, I was going to work for my father and do all that kind of stuff, but I found out about a job as a civil servant for the Army. I applied, got accepted, and became a technical advisor for the Army. And again, I traveled around, spent 7 years in Germany, and I helped the Army. If the soldiers were working on a vehicle, i.e. their tanks, let's say, your M1 tanks, and something happened to the M1 tank and they couldn't figure out what it was, why then they would come and get me, and I would go out to the tank and help them repair it and get a job. I had to be prepared to go into the war zones right along with the Army, and I'd had to help expedite the parts for the equipment that they had when they broke down. Your Hemmets and your Humvees and your tanks and all that kind of stuff. I spent a lot of time in Warren, Michigan, right next to the factories where they built the tanks. And that's where I did 99% of my training as a civil servant. No, I belong to the VFW and the Vets of Foreign Wars, but I've moved around and now I'm here and I haven't reestablished myself anyplace, so I did do that for a while, but I was married, had kids, couldn't spend a lot of time in the VFW, etc., because I was busy at home. I enjoyed the military. I was glad to be able to work in the military, and I love airplanes, and I like to fly, and I enjoyed tearing them apart and putting them back together again. I enjoyed working on tanks and Hemmets and Humvees and all that for the Army, and if I had it to do all over again, I would.